Stay away. We don't want drama, my family said after I covered the entire wedding bill. They say blood is thicker than water, but nobody mentions what happens when that blood runs cold. I learned this lesson at 7 years old, standing in our pristine Charleston kitchen while my stepmother Karen arranged freshly printed family photos on the granite countertop. My fingers traced the glossy edges of image after image: Grace's birthday party at the country club, our family vacation to Kiowa Island, Christmas morning by our 12-foot tree. In every single photo, I was there but barely. Half my face cut off by the camera's edge, positioned behind someone's shoulder, or caught mid-blink while everyone else smiled perfectly. These turned out so nice, Karen murmured, selecting the best shots for our silver frames. Grace looks absolutely radiant in this one. She held up a photo from Grace's 8th birthday party, my half-sister glowing in a pink tulle dress, surrounded by perfectly arranged balloons and presents. I remembered that day clearly because I'd spent most of it in the kitchen, helping the catering staff while Grace held court with her friends. In the photo, you could just make out the edge of my purple dress and one of my braided pigtails. What about this one? I asked, pointing to a different shot where both Grace and I were clearly visible, both of us laughing at something our dad had said. Karen barely glanced at it. Oh, that one's a little blurry, sweetie. We want the nice, clear ones for the frames. The blurry photo was crystal clear. The difference was that in it, I looked happy and Grace looked like a regular kid instead of a porcelain doll. But I was 7, so I just nodded and helped her arrange the chosen photos in their silver frames, each one a testament to Grace's golden perfection and my convenient invisibility. Our family was what Southern society calls well-established. Dad was a prominent real estate attorney, and after my mother died when I was 4, he married Karen within 18 months. Karen brought Grace, who was 6 months younger than me, blonde-haired and green-eyed like her mother. Together, they created what everyone said was a beautiful blended family. The problem with beautiful things, though, is that they require careful curation. I was the daughter who got good grades, but never quite good enough to warrant the praise Grace received for her C+ efforts. I was the one who cleaned up after family dinners while Grace was excused to practice piano, the instrument I'd begged to learn but was told we couldn't fit another lesson into the schedule. I was the daughter who got hand-me-downs while Grace got shopping trips to Charleston's boutiques. Monica is so practical, the adults would say, as if being practical was a consolation prize for being overlooked. The worst part wasn't the favoritism itself, it was the gaslighting that came with it. When I pointed out the obvious differences in treatment, I was told I was being sensitive or creating problems where none existed. The unspoken rule hung in the air like humidity. If I mentioned that maybe, just maybe, the fact that I was the darker-skinned daughter in a family that prized European features had something to do with my second-class status, I was making everything about race. "We don't see color in this family," Karen would say with that tight smile she reserved for uncomfortable conversations. "We just see Grace as more social. You're more of a homebody, Monica." There's nothing wrong with that. But there was something wrong with it, because it wasn't true. I wasn't antisocial. I was systematically excluded. There's a difference between being introverted and being made invisible. The breaking point came during my senior year of high school. I'd worked my ass off for 4 years, maintaining a 4.2 GPA, leading the debate team, volunteering at the animal shelter, all while working part-time at a local bookstore to save money for college. I'd gotten into University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, my dream school, and just needed to figure out the financial aid. About that college fund, Dad said one evening as we sat in his study, surrounded by his law books and framed diplomas. "I need to talk to you about something." My stomach dropped before he even started explaining. The college fund that had been started for me when I was born, the one my biological mother had contributed to before she died, had somehow evaporated. There had been market downturns and unexpected expenses and family emergencies that had depleted it entirely. But what about Grace's fund? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Well, Grace's situation is different," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Karen's parents set up a trust for her. It's completely separate." Translation: Grace's white grandparents had more money and better lawyers. I sat there in his leather chair, surrounded by the trappings of his success, and realized that my dreams had been sacrificed for someone else's priorities. The money that was supposed to be mine, money my own mother had saved, had been redistributed to maintain the lifestyle of a family that saw me as a convenient afterthought. "There are student loans," Dad offered weakly. "And you're so smart, Monica. You'll figure it out." Smart enough to figure out that I was on my own. That night, I called UNC and deferred my admission for a year. Then I called the local community college and enrolled in business classes I could afford with my bookstore savings. While Grace prepared for her senior year with shopping trips and college prep courses paid for by her trust fund, I prepared for a different kind of education altogether. The family photos from that Christmas tell the real story. Grace opening expensive gifts while I smiled politely at my one present, a gift card to Target. Grace in a beautiful red dress while I wore something I'd bought myself from the clearance rack. Grace surrounded by relatives praising her for getting into a mediocre private college while I quietly planned my escape from their conditional love. Monica's taking a gap year. I heard Karen tell relatives at Christmas dinner. She wants to find herself. I wasn't trying to find myself. I was trying to save myself. The final straw came at Grace's high school graduation party. The whole extended family gathered at our house, celebrating Grace's acceptance to Sweetbriar College. I spent the afternoon in the kitchen, helping the caterers, while Grace held court in the garden. When Uncle Robert asked where I was planning to go to college, Dad actually said, "Monica's more of a worker than a scholar. She'll do fine wherever she ends up." A worker, not a scholar. I'd outperformed Grace academically for 12 straight years, but I was a worker and she was a scholar. That night, after the last guests left and Grace was upstairs counting her graduation money, I sat on the back porch with my laptop and started researching something I'd never considered before: coding boot camps. Not because I was particularly interested in tech, but because I'd read they were offering something my family never had: merit-based opportunities where your work spoke louder than your connections. I spent the summer working double shifts at the bookstore and taking online coding tutorials. When Grace left for her freshman year at Sweetbriar, I left too, not for some picturesque college campus, but for a shared apartment in Charlotte with 3 roommates and a coding boot camp that promised to change my life in 6 months. The last family dinner before I left was awkward and stilted. Karen made my favorite meal, chicken and dumplings, as if comfort food could make up for 18 years of making me comfortable with being uncomfortable. "You sure you don't want to just go to College of Charleston?" Dad asked. "It's not too late to apply for spring semester. We could probably work something out financially." Probably. Work something out. The same man who had worked out giving my inheritance to fund Grace's lifestyle was now offering me the possibility of maybe figuring out a way to afford local college. "I'm good," I said, cutting into my chicken. "I'm excited about Charlotte." "Well," Karen said with that familiar tight smile, "coding seems very practical for you." There was that word again. Practical. The consolation prize for daughters who weren't quite golden enough for anything better. As I loaded my beat-up Honda Civic with everything I owned, Grace appeared on the front porch in her silk pajamas, looking like a Southern belle from a movie. "I'll miss you," she said, and for a moment, I almost believed her. "Take care of yourself, Gracie," I replied, because despite everything, she was still my little sister. Still the girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms before Karen taught her that I wasn't the kind of person you turn to for comfort. I drove away from that pristine Charleston house with $3,000 in savings, a determination to never be anyone's afterthought again, and a promise to myself that I'd build a life where my worth wasn't determined by how well I played supporting roles in other people's stories. I had no idea that 10 years later, I'd be returning to their world with enough money to rewrite the entire script and enough wisdom to know that some people only value you when you're writing the checks. 10 years later, I was pulling shots at a trendy coffee shop in Charlotte's South End, my computer science degree from community college and coding bootcamp certificates hanging proudly in my studio apartment, when my phone buzzed with a text that would change everything. "Monica, we need a UX designer who can start Monday. $75,000. You interested?" The text was from Marcus, a a guy I'd met at a black tech meetup who'd been following my freelance design work. His startup, Finance Flow, was developing an app to help people manage their money better, specifically targeting communities that traditional banks had ignored for decades. I looked around the coffee shop where I'd been working for 2 years, saving every penny while building my portfolio at night. The customers barely saw me as I handed them their oat milk lattes, just like my family had barely seen me growing up. But unlike my family, this invisibility was temporary. "When do I start?" I texted back. Walking into Finance Flow's warehouse office that Monday morning felt like stepping into a different universe. The space buzzed with young developers, designers, and product managers, most of them Black and Latino, all of them hungry to build something meaningful. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the only one in the room who looked like me or understood what it felt like to be overlooked by traditional institutions. "We're not just building an app," Marcus explained during my first team meeting. "We're building financial freedom for people who've been shut out of wealth-building opportunities for generations." I threw myself into the work with an intensity that surprised even me. Every wireframe I designed, every user flow I optimized, every accessibility feature I advocated for, it all felt personal. I was designing for people like me, people who'd been told they were practical instead of brilliant, people who'd been handed the consolation prizes while others got the real opportunities. The app launched 18 months later to explosive growth. We'd created something that actually worked for people who'd been ignored by traditional financial services. Users could set up savings goals, get microloans without predatory interest rates, and access financial education that didn't talk down to them. Within 6 months, we had over 1 million users. "Monica," Marcus said one day, sliding into the chair across from my standing desk, "we need to talk about equity." I'd been so focused on the work that I hadn't paid much attention to the business side. When Marcus explained that we were going public and that my 3% equity stake would be worth somewhere between $5 and $8 million, I literally laughed out loud. "That's not real money," I said. "It's very real money," he replied. "Congratulations, you're about to be a millionaire." The IPO happened on a Tuesday in March. I watched our stock price climb on my laptop from the same coffee shop where I'd been working 3 years earlier, wearing my lucky Jordans and the braids I'd refused to straighten for corporate America. When the market closed, my 3% was worth $6.2 million. I didn't quit my job. I didn't buy a car or a house or anything flashy. Instead, I did something that would have baffled my family. I kept working, kept living in my studio apartment, and started quietly funneling money into a nonprofit I'd been dreaming about since my bootcamp days. Code Queens was my answer to the pipeline problem in tech. Every Saturday, I taught coding to Black and brown girls in Charlotte's underserved neighborhoods, using the same warehouse space where Finance Flow had started. These girls reminded me of myself at their age, brilliant, ambitious, but lacking access to the opportunities that would let their brilliance shine. "Miss Monica," 10-year-old Zara asked during one of our Python sessions, "did you always know you wanted to be rich?" "I never wanted to be rich," I told her honestly. "I wanted to be free." For 3 years, I lived a double life. At work, I was Monica, the successful UX designer who drove a Honda Civic and brought lunch from home. At family gatherings, the few I bothered to attend, I was Monica, the tech worker who'd done okay for herself. Nobody asked too many questions about my job, probably assuming I was making decent money, but nothing spectacular. Grace, meanwhile, had become exactly what everyone expected, a social media manager for a Charleston boutique, dating a series of well-connected guys, posting Instagram stories from wine tastings and charity galas. Her life looked picture-perfect, all pastel filters and inspirational quotes. Then, on a random Thursday evening while I was reviewing Code Queen's budget projections, my phone lit up with notifications. Grace had posted something that made my entire extended family lose their minds with excitement. The post was Peak Grace, a close-up of her left hand with a massive diamond ring, overlaid with sparkle filters, and the caption, "He asked and I said yes. Ring sparkles, can't wait to marry my best friend. Hashtag engaged, hashtag Southern Belle, hashtag dreams come true." The comments poured in from relatives I hadn't talked to in years. "So beautiful. Perfect couple. When's the wedding?" You deserve this happiness. I scrolled through the photos she'd posted over the past year, documenting her relationship with Evan, a Charleston lawyer from an old money family, the kind of guy our father would love. They looked like they'd stepped out of a Southern Living magazine. Perfectly coordinated outfits, perfectly staged moments, perfectly curated happiness. That night, I sat in my studio apartment, looking out at Charlotte's skyline, and made a decision that surprised even me. I was going to pay for Grace's entire wedding. Not because I suddenly missed my family, or because I'd forgiven them for 28 years of making me feel invisible. I was going to do it because I could. Because somewhere along the way, the practical daughter had become the one with real power, and it was time for my family to understand exactly who they'd been underestimating all these years. It would be a peace offering wrapped in a power move, my way of showing them that the daughter they'd written off as practical had built something extraordinary while they weren't paying attention. I pulled up Grace's Instagram again and hit the heart on her engagement post. Then I opened my laptop and started researching wedding venues in Charleston. Time to write myself back into the family story, this time with the pen that really mattered: money. I called Grace on a Sunday morning, 3 weeks after her engagement post broke the family internet. "Monica," she squealed, her voice hitting that pitch that meant she was either genuinely excited or performing excitement for an audience. "Oh my God, I can't believe you called. Did you see the ring? Isn't it gorgeous? Evan has such amazing taste and..." "Grace," I interrupted gently, "I want to pay for your wedding." Silence. Then, "What?" "I want to pay for your wedding."
The whole thing.
"Venue, catering, flowers, music, dress, everything." "Monica, that's insane. Do you have any idea how much a real Charleston wedding costs? We're talking like $50,000 minimum for what I want, and..." "I know exactly how much it costs," I said, scrolling through the vendor spreadsheet I'd been building for 2 weeks. "I've already done the research." Another silence. Then Grace's voice dropped to a whisper. "Wait, do you actually have that kind of money?" "I have that kind of money."
How?
"Tech," I said simply. Turns out being practical paid off. The venue appointment was scheduled for the following Saturday at Magnolia Gardens, the kind of place where Charleston's elite celebrated life's biggest moments. I drove down from Charlotte in my Honda Civic, dressed in a simple black blazer and my lucky Jordans, carrying a leather portfolio that contained something my family had never seen: real power. Grace and Karen were already there when I arrived, along with Evan and his mother, Patricia, a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a Talbot's catalog and probably had opinions about the right kind of people. They were clustered around a mahogany table in the venue's consultation room, looking slightly overwhelmed by the pricing sheets spread before them. "Monica." Grace jumped up and hugged me, and for a moment, it felt like we were kids again. "I still can't believe you're doing this." The wedding planner, a polished woman named Vivian who clearly knew old Charleston money when she saw it, looked me up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "So nice to meet you," she said in that tone Southern women use when they're being polite while making judgments. "Let's talk budget," I said, settling into my chair and pulling out my portfolio. "Well," Vivian began, "for a spring wedding at Magnolia Gardens, with Grace's vision of..." "What's Grace's vision?" I interrupted. Grace lit up. Cherry blossom ceremony arch, reception in the main ballroom, seated dinner for 200, live band, premium bar package, and I saw these Swarovski crystal table linens in a magazine that would be perfect. "Honey," Karen whispered, "maybe we should start with something more reasonable." "No," I said firmly. "If that's what Grace wants, that's what Grace gets." I turned to Vivian. "How much for everything on her list?" Vivian's eyebrows rose slightly. "For everything Grace mentioned, plus photography, videography, and coordination, we're looking at approximately $75,000. "That seems reasonable," I said, pulling out my American Express Centurion card and placing it on the table like I was laying down a royal flush. The room went completely silent. Even Evan, who'd been scrolling through his phone, looked up. The black card sat there gleaming, a piece of metal that spoke a language everyone in that room understood: serious money. "I'm sorry," Patricia said slowly, But what exactly do you do in tech? I help build things that matter, I replied evenly. Vivian's entire demeanor shifted. Suddenly, she was leaning forward, making eye contact, speaking directly to me instead of around me. Miss Brooks, would you like to see our premium package options? We have some truly spectacular add-ons that might interest someone with your vision. As Vivian launched into descriptions of upgraded florals and premium linens, I watched Karen lean over to whisper something to Patricia. I couldn't hear the words, but I caught the gist. She's just helping with the bills. Just helping with the bills. Like I was some generous relative chipping in for the photographer instead of the person single-handedly funding their daughter's dream wedding. I have one condition, I said when Vivian finished her presentation. The table tensed. Here it comes, their faces set. The strings attached. The leverage play. I want a seat at the family table, I continued. Next to Grandma Ruth. Grace blinked. That's it. That's it. Of course. Grace squealed. Monica, you'll be right there with us and… Actually, I continued, pulling out my vendor research, I'd like to make a few additions to the music lineup. Oh, Vivian asked, pen poised. I want a gospel choir for the ceremony. The Macedonia Baptist Church Choir, specifically. They're incredible. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Patricia's smile became strained. Karen shifted uncomfortably. Even Grace looked uncertain. Honey, Karen said carefully, we were thinking more traditional church music? Gospel is traditional, I said evenly. It's our tradition. Our family's tradition. Because it was. Grandma Ruth had sung in Macedonia's choir for 40 years. My mother had been married with gospel music. It was our roots, even if the rest of the family had spent decades trying to prune them away in favor of something more palatable to Charleston society. The Macedonia choir it is, Vivian said smoothly, though I caught her glancing at Patricia's increasingly tight expression. For the next 2 hours, I authorized expense after expense. Cherry blossom arches flown in from Japan. Swarovski crystal, everything. A 7-course tasting menu. Premium champagne. A live jazz band for cocktail hour and a DJ for dancing. Flowers that cost more than most people's cars. With each swipe of my card, I watched my family's expressions change. Confusion gave way to awe, then to something that looked almost like respect. For the first time in my life, they were hanging on my every word, not because they had to, but because I held the power. This is going to be the wedding of the century, Vivian declared as we wrapped up, my black card having just authorized a $90,000 celebration. As we walked out to the parking lot, Grace grabbed my arm. Monica, I don't know how to thank you. Just be happy, I said, meaning it. But as I drove back to Charlotte, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just set something in motion that would change everything. I'd bought my way back into the family story, but I was about to learn that some stories aren't worth being part of, no matter how much money you throw at them. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing Code Queen's quarterly budget, 2 weeks before what everyone had started calling Grace and Evan's big day. The subject line was innocent enough. Wedding update important. I opened it expecting logistical details, maybe a change in the ceremony time or a question about the gospel choir's setup requirements. Instead, I found 3 paragraphs that felt like a punch to the gut delivered in Times New Roman font. Dear Monica, first, we cannot express how grateful we are for your incredible generosity in making Grace's dream wedding possible. Your support has been beyond anything we could have imagined, and we know this day will be absolutely perfect because of you. However, after much discussion and consideration of the overall event flow, we think it would be best if you didn't attend the ceremony and reception. We know this might seem sudden, but we want the day to have a certain vibe, and we're concerned that your presence might complicate things unnecessarily. You understand how these events can get, and we just want everything to feel natural and uncomplicated. We hope you know this doesn't diminish our appreciation for everything you've done. We're planning a small family dinner the week after the wedding where we can properly celebrate and thank you. We think this arrangement will work better for everyone involved. With love and gratitude, the Brooks Whitman families. I read it 3 times, each pass making the message clearer and more devastating. Certain vibe. Natural and uncomplicated. Better for everyone involved. Translation: we'll take your money, but we don't want your black face in the wedding photos. My hands were shaking as I forwarded the email to my best friend Keisha with a single line. Am I reading this right? Her response came back within minutes. What the actual fuck? Monica, they just uninvited you from the wedding you paid for because you might complicate their aesthetic? I sat in my office at Finance Flow, staring out at Charlotte's skyline, feeling like that 7-year-old again, the one whose face got cropped out of family photos because she didn't fit the frame. Except this time, I wasn't powerless. This time, I had options. I pulled up Grace's Instagram, scrolling through her latest posts. The past 2 weeks had been a blur of bridal shower photos, bachelorette party highlights, and countdown posts. 2 weeks until I marry my soulmate. 2 hearts, hashtag blessed beyond measure, hashtag Southern wedding, hashtag dreams come true. In every photo, she glowed with anticipation. Her bridesmaids, all blonde, all thin, all fitting seamlessly into Charleston's society scene, surrounded her like a Pinterest board come to life. I wasn't in any of the photos, of course. I hadn't been invited to the bridal shower or bachelorette party, but I told myself it was because I lived in Charlotte and they were busy with local friends. Now I understood the truth. I'd never been part of the real celebration. I'd been the bank account with legs, funding their perfect day while being carefully edited out of the narrative. My phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Did you get our email? I know it's weird, but trust me, this is better for everyone. You'll love the family dinner. And Evan's family is just really traditional about wedding stuff. You know how it is. No, Grace. I didn't know how it was. I knew how it felt to be treated like an ATM with a heartbeat, but I didn't know how it was to uninvite your sister from the wedding she paid for because her presence might clash with your carefully curated Southern Belle fantasy. I didn't respond to Grace's text. Instead, I did something that had become second nature over the past decade. I started researching. I pulled up my laptop and opened the folder labeled Grace's Wedding, where I'd been keeping all the contracts and correspondence. Venue contract, catering agreement, florist terms, band booking, photography package. Everything I'd signed and authorized over the past 3 months. That's when I noticed something that made my heart race. Every single contract had the same clause buried in the fine print. Deposit required upon booking. Final balance due upon delivery/day of service. I grabbed my credit card statements and started cross-referencing. Magnolia Gardens, $8,000 deposit paid, $22,000 balance remaining. Premier Catering, $6,500 deposit paid, $18,500 balance remaining. Charleston Classical Strings, $1,200 deposit paid, $3,800 balance remaining. Line by line, I calculated the devastating truth. I'd paid roughly $25,000 in deposits across all vendors. The remaining balance, due on the day of the wedding, was over $65,000. $65,000 that Grace and Evan would need to pay in exactly 14 days, when vendors showed up expecting final payment before they'd unload so much as a single cherry blossom petal. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face for the first time since reading that email. My family thought they were so clever, taking my money while pushing me out of their picture. They'd calculated that I was too polite, too practical, too desperate for their approval to cause a scene. They'd forgotten one important detail. I wasn't that powerless little girl anymore. I was a tech executive who'd built her success by understanding systems, contracts, and leverage points. And right now, I was looking at the biggest leverage point of my life. I opened a new email and started typing a response to the Brooks Whitman families. Thank you for your email. I completely understand your desire for the day to feel natural and uncomplicated. I think that's exactly what Grace deserves. I'll respect your wishes and make alternative plans for that Saturday. Hope you have a beautiful celebration. With love, Monica. Short, gracious, and giving them no hint of what was coming. Because in 14 days, they were going to learn that the practical daughter had just become their biggest problem. I started making calls the next morning, armed with strong coffee and a list of vendor contacts. Each conversation followed the same script I'd rehearsed the night before. Hi, this is Monica Brooks calling about the Brooks Whitman wedding on Saturday. I need to make a change to the payment method for the final balance. Of course, Miss Brooks, came the response from Amanda at Premier Catering. What can I help you with? I need you to remove my card from the account and use a different payment method for the remaining balance. The bride will be providing a new card on the day of service. Oh, okay. Are you sure? That's quite a large balance for day of payment, $18,500. Most clients prefer to handle that in advance. I'm sure, I said, watching Charlotte's morning traffic from my office window. Grace wants to handle the final payment herself. Something about taking ownership of her special day. Well, if that's what the bride wants, I'll update the file. Just to confirm, we'll need payment before we begin setup on Saturday morning. Absolutely. That's standard procedure, right? After Amanda confirmed the change, I scheduled a calendar reminder for 7 a.m. Saturday morning. Call Amanda Ree. Grace's payment status. The conversation with Magnolia Gardens was equally smooth. The florist, confused but accommodating, agreed to update their payment method. The band's booking agent seemed relieved that someone else would be handling the transaction. One by one, I systematically removed myself from the financial equation while setting up a domino effect that would topple exactly 14 days later. The hardest call was to Sister Mary Catherine at Macedonia Baptist Church about the gospel choir. Monica, baby, she said in that warm voice I remembered from childhood visits with Grandma Ruth, I'm so excited about Saturday. Ruth would have loved seeing our choir at Grace's wedding. About that, I said, my voice catching slightly. There's been a change of plans. The family has decided they want different music. Different music? But you said. I know what I said, but it's Grace's day, and she wants something more traditional. The silence stretched long enough that I almost broke down and told Sister Mary Catherine the truth. But she was too kind to be dragged into my family's mess. Well, she finally said, if that's what Grace wants. Though I have to say, baby, that girl doesn't know what she's missing. Our choir would have brought the house down. Yes, ma'am. They would have. That Friday night, I drove to my apartment balcony with a glass of sweet tea, the first I'd had in years, and watched the sun set over Charlotte. Tomorrow, somewhere between the sunrise and the first guests arriving at Magnolia Gardens, my family would discover that the daughter they'd written off had written them out of their perfect day. My phone was suspiciously quiet. No last-minute calls from Grace asking about vendor details. No check-ins from Karen about wedding day logistics. They were probably having their rehearsal dinner right now, toasting their successful editing of me from the celebration I'd funded. I set my alarm for 6:30 a.m. and went to bed early. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear, perfect wedding weather. I made coffee, settled onto my balcony with my phone, and waited. At exactly 7 a.m., I called Amanda at Premier Catering. Amanda, hi. This is Monica Brooks checking on the payment status for today's wedding. Oh, Monica. Thank goodness you called. We're at the venue waiting for the bride's payment information, but no one seems to have the new card details. Our drivers can't start unloading until we process payment. That's strange. Grace should have all that information. Have you tried calling her directly? We've been calling for 30 minutes. It goes straight to voicemail. Well, I'm sure she'll sort it out soon. It's a big day. Lots of moving parts. At 7:15, I called the florist. Same story. Trucks full of cherry blossoms sitting in the parking lot. Drivers checking their watches. No payment authorization in sight. By 8 a.m., my phone started ringing. Monica. Grace's voice was high and panicked. The vendors are saying they need payment this morning, but I thought you already paid everything. I paid the deposits, I said calmly, sipping my coffee. The final balances were always due on delivery. Didn't you read the contracts? Contracts? Monica, I don't understand contracts. You said you were handling everything. I said I was paying for everything. I never said I was handling day of logistics. That's usually the bride's responsibility. The line went quiet except for Grace's ragged breathing. Monica, please. The ceremony is in 4 hours. Everyone's already getting ready. The photographer is here. The guests are starting to arrive early. Grace, I'm sure you and Evan can figure it out. You're both smart people from good families. This is exactly the kind of thing you handle when you want your wedding to feel natural and uncomplicated.
Click.
Karen called at 8:30. Monica, honey, there seems to be some confusion about the vendor payments.
Click.
Dad called at 9:15. Monica, we need to talk. This is getting out of hand.
Click.
At 9:45, my voicemail notification chimed. Karen's voice, cracking with desperation. Monica, I don't know what we did to hurt you, but please don't punish Grace for it. She's in her wedding dress crying. The vendors are packing up. The guests don't know what's happening. Please, honey, just call me back.
We can fix this.
We can fix whatever's wrong. But there was nothing left to fix. For 28 years, they'd made their priorities clear. I was finally just respecting their choices. At 10:30, Grace's final text came through. I know I hurt you. I know we all did. But please don't do this to me. I'm begging you. I turned off my phone, refilled my sweet tea, and watched the clouds drift across the Carolina sky. Somewhere in Charleston, the Brooks Whitman wedding was imploding in real time. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't rushing to clean up their mess. The first TikTok went viral by Sunday afternoon. Y'all, I just attended the most chaotic wedding that never happened, said a 20-something guest, filming herself in the Magnolia Gardens parking lot while confused relatives milled around in their formal wear behind her. The bride was in full dress. The groom was in his tux. 200 guests showed up, and nothing was set up. No flowers, no food, no music. Just an empty ballroom and a lot of very confused rich people. The video had 2.3 million views by Monday morning. More videos followed throughout the week. Guest after guest sharing their bewildered experiences of the Charleston wedding that wasn't. Someone had filmed the moment when Grace, still in her $8,000 wedding dress, stood in the empty ballroom crying while Evan's mother made frantic phone calls to vendors who'd already left. The whole family kept whispering about some payment mix-up, reported another guest. But honey, if you can't afford your wedding, maybe don't invite 200 people to watch you not get married? I watched it all unfold from my apartment, feeling a complex mix of satisfaction and sadness. Part of me, the part that remembered being 7 years old and invisible, felt vindicated. But another part, the part that still remembered Grace crawling into my bed during thunderstorms, felt something that might have been grief. By Wednesday, the damage control efforts began. Dad took out a second mortgage on the Charleston house. Karen started a GoFundMe with a carefully worded title, Help Grace and Evan Start Their Journey Together, that raised $3,847 from family friends who probably donated out of pity rather than genuine enthusiasm. Grace's Instagram went dark for exactly 1 week before returning with a series of posts about learning to find joy in simple moments and realizing what really matters. The family group chat that I'd been removed from months ago apparently exploded with theories about my breakdown and strategies for getting Monica the help she clearly needs. Aunt Susan, bless her heart, called to stage what she probably thought was an intervention. Monica, honey, we're all worried about you. This isn't like you. Actually, Aunt Susan, this is exactly like me. You just never paid attention before. But while my family scrambled to rebuild their reputation and salvage Grace's wedding dreams, I was busy with a project of my own. I'd kept in touch with every vendor from that canceled Charleston wedding, and by Thursday, I had a proposition for them. I want to host a pop-up wedding celebration, I told Amanda from Premier Catering. 20 couples this Saturday at my nonprofit's campus in Charlotte. No charge to the couples. I'll cover everything. 20 couples? Monica, that's amazing. But are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The same vendors who'd packed up their cherry blossoms and Swarovski linens in Charleston spent Friday setting up a completely different kind of celebration at Code Queen's warehouse space. Instead of one wealthy couple having their perfect day, 20 couples from Charlotte's underserved communities, people who'd never dreamed of affording a real wedding, would have theirs. Couples like Jasmine and Marcus, who'd been together 8 years but couldn't afford more than a courthouse ceremony. Like Mrs. Rodriguez and Mr. Johnson, both widowed seniors who'd found love again at 75. Like Destiny and Aisha, a young lesbian couple whose families had rejected them but who'd built their own chosen family in Charlotte's LGBTQ+ community. The Macedonia Baptist Church Choir, who'd been so graciously uninvited from Grace's wedding, led every couple down a makeshift aisle lined with those Japanese cherry blossoms. Sister Mary Catherine's voice soared through Amazing Grace, while 20 couples, dressed in everything from vintage thrift store finds to borrowed suits, exchanged vows under arches that had been meant for Charleston society. Local news stations picked up the story by Saturday evening. Tech executive turns canceled wedding into community celebration ran on 3 different channels. The footage showed real joy, not the curated perfection of social media, but the raw, authentic happiness of people who'd never expected anything this beautiful. "This is what community looks like," I told the reporter, standing in front of 20 couples sharing their first dances to the same jazz band that was supposed to play for Grace and Evan. When you lift each other up instead of pulling each other down. The video of Mrs. Rodriguez and Mr. Johnson, both in their 70s, dancing slowly while their combined 11 grandchildren cheered, got shared more widely than any TikTok about my family's drama. The photo of Jasmine and Marcus cutting a cake surrounded by friends who'd become family made the front page of Charlotte's community newspaper. That night, as I helped clean up the warehouse-turned-wedding venue, Zara from Code Queens tugged on my dress. "Miss Monica, are you sad you didn't get to go to your sister's wedding?" I knelt down to her level, looking into eyes that sparkled with the same intelligence and determination I'd seen in my own mirror 30 years ago. "No, baby girl. I'm exactly where I belong." Because I finally understood what I'd been searching for my whole life. It wasn't a seat at my family's table. It was the courage to build my own table and fill it with people who saw my worth without needing a price tag attached. 6 months later, Grace and Evan had a small ceremony at his family's historic estate, with 50 guests and a budget they actually could afford. I saw the photos on Instagram. Pretty enough, proper enough, and completely forgettable. Meanwhile, Code Queens had expanded to 3 cities, funded entirely by a tech executive who understood that real family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when it matters, who celebrates your success without conditions, and who never makes you shrink yourself to fit their frame. I never got that seat next to Grandma Ruth at Grace's wedding table. I got something better. A seat at the head of my own table, surrounded by the family I chose and the community I built. And honey, the view from here is spectacular.